Today I'm going to be preparing a planning tool and fight breakdown for all 30 fights in preparation of the Omega Boss Rush, Week 6 of the Summer SmackDown Omega. That said, we do know that 30 of the 31 fights are the fights from the previous 5 weeks. That was confirmed in the forums, where they tell us that Week 6 is a gauntlet combining the fights from the previous 5 weeks for the Ultimate Challenge. I will go week by week breaking down each fight and the nodes and giving some kind of playstyle tips, etc. And then I'll go through my spreadsheet kind of showing how I use it and how you can use it to plan out your team. And I'll go through 5 champions centered, where like I take one champion that defines the team and then how you build your team around that. Options in order to develop your potential team for the Omega Boss Rush. There are lots of options to center your team on and put a centerpiece there. I just chose 5 that I thought would be really good jumping points as evidence. So that said, I'm going to start with Week 1, or Alpha, and break down this thing fight. So this is a thing with Enhanced Fury, Adaptive, Heavy Hitter, and Empowered Immunity. Now, this is frustrating, but none of these nodes are any seriously difficult nodes, except for the Empowered Immunity. Just know that if you bring like a bleeding champion because you want to deal with thing via bleed, that he is going to be gaining extra power, a pretty significant chunk, so you do want to face him pretty regularly depending on who you bring, but otherwise it's a standard thing fight and technically anybody can take him on. Next up is Diablo, who has Redoubled Determination, Force of Will, Kinetic Brewing, Limber, and Toxic Rage. Now the nodes to be noticed here are the Redoubled Determination, so if you're bleeding, poisoning, or armor breaking him, you are going to have more power. But both of Diablo's special ones are physical specials, essentially physical specials. You can just dash back a significant distance and then you won't have to worry about dexing it. The major key here is the Kinetic Brewing and the Toxic Rage combination. Every time you hit him, there's a chance he'll brew a concoction, and once he has his concoction brewed, there's a chance that he'll consume it. When he consumes concoction, he's going to give himself a poison debuff, making him hit harder, but more importantly, it's going to give him a 5-second unstoppable buff. So while anybody can do this fight, just be mindful when you're hitting him, watch to see if he has those concoctions. It does take a brief moment for him to consume them, so you will get an indicator that it's coming up and then back off when he does go unstoppable as a result, if you're not bringing like a slow champion or something. Next up is Havoc. Havoc has Enhanced Energy Attacks, Heavy Hitter, Aggressive, and Crumbling Armor, as well as improved power gain. Now, the first 3 nodes are nothing crazy. You do have to be mindful of the Heavy Hitter, because a lot of times people heavy counter Havoc, so you're not going to be able to do that. Crumbling Armor means that if you are bringing an armor up champion to counter Havoc, that you have to play relatively aggressive around the feedback, the explosion of the feedback, otherwise you are going to be taking that damage. And the improved power gain just means that his passive power gain is more relevant, but it's not that bad. Havoc's power gain is relatively slow, so as long as you're baiting specials fairly early, you don't have anything too crazy to worry about. But if you do end up taking a special 3, you're probably going to die. Next up is Mr. Sinister. He has Debilitate, Recovery, Defensive, Dark Intellect, Burden of Might, and Genetic Perfection. Now, Mr. Sinister, I think, is one of the few fights that you need a hard counter for, because if you don't bring a proper counter for this Mr. Sinister fight, the healing, the recovery is going to screw you. But as long as you bring a proper answer like heal block or really, really good damage over time, and just be mindful that that damage over time needs to be not so much special reliant, or if it is special reliant, you need to be blocking / parrying the special one, because every time you trigger dexterity, you are going to trigger Burden of Might and you are going to lose power. So you want that, damage over time to be either like on a heavy or just like a medium or light attack, or maybe even a special 1, maybe a special 2, as well as remember that he can throw those debuffs back at you with his special 1. So be mindful of that, but overall, as long as you just bring a proper Mr. Sinister counter, not that bad. Next up is Nick Fury. He has Extend, Enhanced Fury, Adaptive, Aggressive, Shank, and Tactical Adjustment. Now, Shank means that when he hits your block, there's a chance that he will inflict you with a bleed. So be mindful that it is nice to have a bleed immune champion here. The issue is if you bring a bleed immune champion, so you don't have to worry about taking the bleeds on block, there is a chance he's going to gain a tactical charge every time you're immune to bleed. which can be frustrating. So ideally, you bring a mutant who is also bleed immune, or just bring a mutant and don't rely too heavily on blocking, which is not too hard versus Nick Fury, because you just push him to a special 2 and then punish the special 2. Overall, not the worst of fights. Havoc is a really good option, Omega Red being a really good option as well. And then next up, we have Captain Marvel Movie. She has enhanced armor breaks, special 1 bias, redoubled determination, binary might, and energy sensitive. Now, the thing to think about with this Captain Marvel Movie is she is starting with 10 binary charges. So you're gonna probably want to start with a parry heavy just to knock her down, trigger the binary ignition, so you're not letting her get into a high amount of charges where you have this like long period of phase where she's got a lot of Furies doing really good damage and you're dealing with unblockable specials. The faster you trigger that, the more often you trigger that, the less you have to worry about like a 22 stack binary ignition Captain Marvel pummeling you in the corner. So that said, I'll stick a timestamp here and we'll move on to week number 2. Bum, bum, bum. Ooh. And bear with me, I'm just jumping through each one on my phone. It gives me a moment to like kind of recollect my thoughts, move on to the next week. And I'll go through my team as well. That's how I'll start with my spreadsheet. And feel free to comment your team if you're, having one already in your mind, because it will help out other players and it'll also give me insight into what other people are bringing to these boss rushes. That said, week number 2, we have Human Torch to start. He has Enhanced Incinerate, Heavy Hitter, Aggressive, Redoubled Determination, Spontaneous Combustion, and Hot-Blooded. Now, the major thing here is the Hot-Blooded. This is a fairly standard Human Torch fight, right? Like, just don't bring a Mystic, don't bring an energy-hitting champion, but you also don't want to bleed him. If you bleed him, it's going to cause his temperature to rise, and that's going to be problematic over time. So just don't bleed him, otherwise you can bring pretty much any champion to that fight. Next up is Annihilus. He has Enhanced Armor Break, Kinetic Reactor, Electric Fluctuations, Aggressive, and Resistor. If you just bring a standard Mystic, this is a relatively standard Annihilus, as long as you're mindful that taking blocked hits is going to generate power, so you want to bait specials early and fast and be mindful to proper decks so you're not pushing into a special 2. It's a pretty good amount of block damage, but any Mystic makes good work of Annihilus for the most part. Next up is Call Obsidian. He has some nodes here: Aggressive, Special 2 Bias, Special 2 Enhanced, Titan's Favor, Titan Conquest, and Mystic Conditioning. The Mystic Conditioning affects Nullification a bit, but Call Obsidian's not a hard fight, and none of these nodes make him challenging, so that's a pretty cut and dry fight. I literally just put LOL in my spreadsheet. Next up is Ebony Maw. Now, he has Aggressive, Enhanced Energy Attacks, Kinetic Transference, Faltering Mind, and Critical Setup. Now, this is tricky. So the first one is Kinetic Transference. He's going to be gaining power when he hits into your block, and Ebony Maw's first medium attack can't be parried. It doesn't count as a parry stun, so that's going to be free power that he's gaining. When he triggers Falter, you're going to have 100% reduced defensive ability accuracy reduction, which means while that Falter is active, trying to parry stun him to like stall while you have that miss active is not going to work, and you're going to be giving him power. And then keep in mind that when he throws a special one once a fight, but at least once a fight, if you have the precision active from dexterity, he will nullify it and you will degenerate as he completes one of his missions from Thanos. It's a pretty sizable chunk of degeneration, so look out for that. And then finally is Critical Setup. When the attacker ends combo with the same attack they ended their previous combo with, the attack is a guaranteed critical hit. So watch out for that, because critical hits that are guaranteed versus Ebony Maw do automatically miss. So you do need to alternate, kind of the same way you do with Mixmaster, but just the last hit of your combo. Next up, we have Invisible Woman. Enhanced crits, Power Thief Mist, Forced Field, Heal Block, Long Distance Relationship, and Masochism. Now, the nodes to like really watch out for here are Masochism, which can be a little annoying on Invisible Woman, but not the absolute worst as long as you have good damage output, and Forced Field, because the Forced Field means that she plays defensively when her shield is active and aggressive when it's not. And that kind of playstyle shift is important, especially if you're trying to bait specials. So as long as you're mindful of that, there's nothing too crazy for there. And then finally on this week is Namor. Namor has Enhanced Bleed, Physical Resistance, Outrageous 3, Rapid Metabolism, and Spite. So your parry stuns are going to be significantly shorter, and then Spite is going to be frustrating if you're triggering Dex. Now, it's not too bad of a problem. Essentially, once he goes out into his outrage, his power is going to continuously deplete. So as long as you're like comboing into him when he outrages, you don't have to worry about Spite. And then if his power is just going to drain a little bit, and then if you trigger Dex, yes, he will have Spite, but you don't have to worry about the special 3 threat, and you just punish his specials afterwards, and you kind of keep that kind of rotation up in the meantime. That said, we'll stick a timestamp here and we'll jump into week number 3. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, so week number 3, we have Stealth Suit Spider-Man. He has Debilitate, Enhanced Fury, great power comes great utility. That affects his pre-fight. It's not that big of a deal. Catch This, whenever he evades, he throws the web cartridge debuff on you, and improved power gain. This is a relatively simple fight. The nice thing about Stealth Suit Spider-Man is that even though he does evade, it's only a singular evade. So if you know he has the evade charge up, just be mindful and be ready to throw out your block, because it's only one evade, and if you're hitting it on a light attack, you will have plenty of time to either block or dex or back off, or in a lot of situations with characters who have fast light attacks, you can even just light spam, and you'll catch him after he evades when he goes to punish you. So nothing too threatening there. Pretty simple Stealth Suit Spidey. Next up is Mysterio, who has Enhanced Poison, Physical Resistance, Nano Plague, Toxic Behavior, and Enhanced Visibility. Now, essentially, you need a non-robot Poison Immune champion. You could also jump in here and just blast him down as fast as possible, but if you don't want to have to worry too much about, you know, the poison, etc., you just bring a non-robot Poison Immune. Robots will suffer from shock instead, so that will kill you that way. And then it's just a pretty standard Mysterio fight. You don't have to worry about the nodes or really the threat he provides, as long as you're mindful of the special 1 and the special 2 and the interactions there and how to play around them. Next up is Sunspot. He has Enhanced Incinerate, Hot and Bothered, Trial by Fire, Rapid Metabolism 2, Suns Out, Guns Out. So Sunspot's not too bad of a fight. The only node you really have to be mindful of here is Trial by Fire, where you're taking Incinerate damage. So if you're not bringing an Incinerate Immune or Ghost, you are going to be taking a really healthy dose of Incinerate damage. Just bring a proper counter and nothing too scary there. It's a pretty simple fight. Next up is Warlock. He has Enhanced Armor Up, Enhanced Power Drain, Bubble Shield, Empowered Immunity, Spreading Infection, and Masochism. Now, you either want to bring a robot, Quake, High Burst, or make sure you turn Willpower Mastery off, because if you have Willpower active and you trigger the infection, you're gonna get wrecked, you're gonna have a bad time. Masochism's not too bad on Warlock. If you provide any kind of armor break or just decent damage, he goes down really quick. He is a robot, so you probably aren't bringing a bleed or a poison champion anyways, so you don't have to worry too much about the empowered immunity, and it's a pretty normal Warlock fight as long as you're mindful of the infection and the masochism node, but overall not too bad of a fight. Next up is Vision Arcus. He has Enhanced Armor Break, Enhanced Energy Attacks, Limber, Personal Space, and Power Gain Rate Immune. Now, Vision Arcus, you want to bait special 1s, and for this Vision Arcus in particular, you're going to want to bring a Mystic Nullify champion, because you can nullify the power gains and you can make it so you don't have to worry about him pushing into a special 2 and taking a bunch of block damage. Also, you could bring an Armor Break immune or a Cold Snap immune champion, so you don't have to worry about that instead and approach it from that perspective, but then you are going to have to worry about frequently baiting specials. So just make sure you juggle. I think nullification is the easiest way to approach this fight, but if you don't have that in your arsenal, you know, you probably should just rank up a 4-star Mystic. I'm not gonna lie, but you could bring the alternative approach of the Armor Break and the Cold Snap immune. Next up is Clairvoyant. This is a fairly simple fight. She has Aggressive, Debilitate, Stun Immune, Imminent Clairvoyance, and Curse of Death. So the Stun Immune means that every time you try to parry stun, she is going to gain power. So if you're re-parrying she's going to gain quite a bit of power. The good news is that the special 1, the bleeds or poisons or incinerates, whatever phase she happens to be in when she throws it, isn't that much of a damage threat, and the special 2 is very easy to dodge, block. Just be mindful that if she hits 20 clairvoyant charges, she's going to gain an indefinite death immunity, which when you kill her, will trigger, she'll gain a bunch of her health back, and then you're going to have to kill her a second time. So as long as you're aware of that, nothing too crazy there. That said, let's move into week number 4. Making great progress. And you're getting like kind of maybe a common sense between all of these weeks. A lot of these fights can very simply be taken down just with like raw damage output. And that's a big baseline for my spreadsheet when I get to it, is just having like proper damage and just blasting these champions down. So week 4 we'll start with Elsa Bloodstone. She has enhanced special 2 bias, debilitate, double tap, and mix master. Now with the Elsa, you kind of want to bring an anti-evade if possible, otherwise you just adjust your playstyle. If you trigger the evade, she will counterattack and it will hurt. Any champion can do this fight. You just alternate like medium lights, or if you're not confident, you could just parry medium light medium and then parry heavy and then alternate that. It's really easy to keep track of when you're doing it that way. But if you are really confident, you could go like medium light medium and then parry light medium light medium, and kind of alternate in that way. Moving on to Man-Thing. For Man-Thing, you're going to need a poison immune non-robot champion, or Red Guardian specifically. And that is because he has Enhanced Fury, Mystic Ward, Oscillate, Nano Plague is that non-robot aspect, and Spite. Now, the reason you need a poison immune is because whenever he throws a special, it will put a Toxic Postural on you, and when he throws specials again, they automatically drop off and it's going to poison and armor break you for a bad time. You want to bait specials early because the Spite will trigger from the Toxic Postural buffs, which is fairly annoying, and he does have that crit resistance, so champions like Corvus Glaive can't just blast him down very quickly. But overall, his specials aren't hard to dodge. He doesn't hit very hard. If you have willpower active, the armor break will actually heal you, and overall, it's a fairly simple fight. Red Guardian is nice because he doesn't gain buffs, so the Toxic Posturals don't work, and then you won't have to worry about Spite or Poison as long as you're not getting hit. So that's just something I thought was worth noting. Next up is Guillotine 2099. She has enhanced armor ups, aggressive, heavy-handed, power thief miss, and empowered immunity. None of these nodes are really something you need to worry about. The major thing you need to worry about is deactivating Digicloak, which causes her to go invisible, which causes you to miss. So you either need to bring an anti-miss or just constantly parry heavy her to put the Digicloak on cooldown. As long as you're doing that, it's a fairly standard Guillotine 2099, and you probably weren't bringing a bleed or poison champ already because she's a robot. So if you do happen to do that, just be mindful of the power gain. Next up is Mr. Fantastic. He has Debilitate, Prey on the Weak, Heal Block, Stun Once, Twice Shy, and Spry. Now, the Mr. Fantastic, it's ideal if you have an anti-power sting like Nick Fury in his unstunnable phase, but it's okay if you don't. Essentially, each debuff on you gives Mr. Fantastic a small chance to evade, and the power stings are going to get you in the long run, so you're going to want to try alternating between Special 1 and Special 2. Special 3, if you have some kind of power gain, it can get there, but you want to alternate so that you're not stuck with a crossfight debuff, you know, later down the road. Now, be mindful that like when you go, you're probably going to want to throw a special 1 to start, but don't just like immediately throw it to drop the power stings. You want to use the duration and the time on the power stings, that 6-second window, to try and get some extra power. That way when you rebuild up to a power 1, you have the ability to maybe push to a special 2 a bit faster. Next up, let's talk about Dr. Doom. Now, Dr. Doom, he has Enhanced Shock, Enhanced Power Drain, Hazareth Rage, Power Draw, and Hazareth Vengeance. The major note here is that knocking him down has a 50% chance to trigger his Aura of Hazareth, and while his Aura is active, he's more likely to throw a special 2. Besides all of that, it's a pretty standard Dr. Doom fight. Just know that if his Aura is up, he's not likely to throw a special one. So if you're trying to bait that, it's better that you just kind of stall out and wait for the aura to drop, or bait specials early so you don't have to worry about it. Next up is Silver Surfer. He has buff duration, hit me, I dare you, rich get richer, personal space, and life cycle. Now it's ideal if you bring a Mystic champion, but honestly, virtually any champion can do this fight because he doesn't have any anti-stun mechanic, as long as you're mindful of the power gain and the life cycle. Life cycle just means you have to knock him down, ideally multiple times, and then kill him during that window of opportunity where the invulnerability is gone. Silver Surfer, though, fairly easy fight to deal with, again, as long as you're managing the power. And we'll move on to week number 5, the final week. And then the unknown boss, which I can't help you with yet. I will try to discuss it when we see that information. So week number 5, first fight up is Squirrel Girl. Now Squirrel Girl, she has Debilitate, Aggressive, Heavy Hitter, Combo Shield, Rabid, and Cutting Wires. Now essentially non-robot, but the first time she throws her special, as long as you're not getting hit only the first time, Tippy Toe is going to attach to you. And Squirrel Girl, she applies bleeds through block on her medium attacks. So if she hits her medium into your block, it's going to place a bleed. And then when she throws her special, Tippy Toe will attach to you. And because her awakened ability has her start with a combo of 40, it's going to inflict an instant bleed, dealing damage based on the number of bleeds you have active on you. So even though the medium dash bleed isn't like scary or threatening, the instant bleed is a sizable chunk of damage. Be watchful. Ideally, you bring a non-robot bleed immune, but honestly any damaging champion can deal with this as long as you're healthy enough to tank like that first instant bleed. It's not that big of a deal. Next up is Nova. He has Enhanced Fury, Aggressive, World Mind Connection, World Mind Surge, and Personal Space. This is virtually just a Nova fight with some boosted damage, so nothing crazy to worry about there. Next up is Longshot, Critical Resistance, Electric Fluctuations, Return to Sender, Bleed, Limber, and Heart Attack. The main thing to be mindful of here is that if you bleed him, you will receive the bleed instead. Well, there's a chance you will receive a bleed instead, and if you are immune to bleed, you're gonna degen instead. So just bring non-bleed damage, and if you're not Incinerate immune, make sure you're baiting special ones, because when he has Peer of Heart active, I believe it's Pure of Heart, Longshot Special 2 will trigger an Incinerate when he starts to throw, and that will just absolutely annihilate you. So it's just better to deck special ones always. It's one less thing to worry about. Next up is Mojo. He has Energy Resistant, Power Bond Recovery, Shifting Immunity, Bleed, Poison, and Rising Sun. Now, the important note about Mojo is the Rising Sun. First, you're going to want to make him fail prompts as often as possible. So if you see a really easy one like throw a special, maybe just spam parry, right? Like keep him under a bar of power, don't use your special, just spam parry, wait it out, let him fail the mission. It's really going to help you out in the long run. But ideally you're going to want to do a parry heavy playstyle because the Rising Sun gives you Furies. But if he triggers the anti-life field degeneration, the Furies, even though 25 seconds is fairly long, he drops that duration by 90%. Those Furies are going to drop off and you're going to degen like crazy. Also, if he has the anti-life field up and you dex, you don't want to hit him because dropping the precision buff from dexterity is going to cause you to degen like crazy. So again, you can get around this with any champion and playstyle, but you just got to play to Mojo's game and ideally the parry heavy playstyle. Next up is Mole Man. He has Enhanced Bleed, Aggressive, Monster Mosh Pit, Heavy Hitter, and Adaptive. This is a pretty standard Mole Man fight. You actually, ironically, don't want to intercept him because once he triggers Frenzy, he can be stunned. And the damage increase isn't too threatening. Just make sure you don't hit into his block. His specials are fairly easy to dodge, and just wait for him to go frenzied, and then you can reliably parry combo him. If you parry him outside of the frenzy, he will shrug debuffs, so just make sure you're really quick about it, or just back off and wait. Parry light attack is ideal, or you know, Omega Red can prevent him from shrugging off the stun debuff, or maybe Storm Pyramid X if you have the place in your roster. Finally, fight number 30 is Tyrax. He has Enhanced Armor Break, Electric Fluctuations, Galactic Intervention, Long Distance Relationship, and Powerful from Afar. This is a fairly easy Tyrax fight. There's a bit of extra power gain from the Powerful from Afar, but it's really not that much of a threat as long as you're baiting specials a little bit earlier. As long as you do that, you don't have to worry about the threat of a special 3, and it's a fairly simple fight. You could bring a Mystic, you could bring a counter, but honestly, Tyrax is like proximity damage really isn't that threatening, so it's not that hard to deal with. That said, let's jump into the spreadsheet and we'll jump through my team first. So my team, the plan I'm going in with is Nick Fury, Brie Larson, Quake, Deadpool X-Force, and Claire. Now, if I scroll down here, will it let me? No. Okay. Brief moments. Okay, so I have to close out. There we go. I have sheets down here where this is my team, so it's the set of 5, but then I also go through centered on a champion. So if you're trying to use this spreadsheet as like a rough guide and you happen to be using one of these champions, or for Captain Marvel movie pairs of champions, as your main option for the boss fight counter encounters, then these are roughly what I think is the ideal, and I go through them one by one. So correct me if I'm wrong. I apologize. You know, this isn't tested. This is just like based on the nodes and reading through my ideals of who you would bring to each fight. So if you know for sure that it's a bad matchup, feel free to comment and let me know, or you know, if you're already have your team set up, comment and, you know, let the world know, help out each other. But this is not all of the champions you can center your teams on. These are just 5 examples that I set up for convenience to kind of give people an idea of how to set up their planning. So week number 1, or for team number 1, which is my team, I am planning on bringing Nick Fury, Brie Larson, Quake, Deadpool X-Force, and Claire. Now this is essentially a Quake-centered team, so the next tab will be very, very similar. But I tried to Quake all 5 weeks, and I found there were fights where you really don't want to Quake. Fights where it's a little bit harder to Quake, but you just Quake it to avoid the nodes. And fights where you like absolutely do not Quake. So essentially these yellow ones are fights where I was like, it's a little bit harder to Quake, and there's some playstyle changes, but as long as you play properly, pop an attack boost ideally, because the higher damage you have, the less you have to worry about it. They're fairly simple fights. So those two are the Havoc and the Ebony Maw, and then these fights in red are the fights that I just absolutely don't want to Quake. That doesn't mean they're not Quakeable, it just means that I didn't want to. Some of them absolutely not, but for the most part, some of these can be Quaked. So the first one is Invisible Woman. I think Nick Fury is a great option here. It's just so much easier to take her down with a really strong bleeds. Next up is Namor, who I plan on ramping Brie Larson up with, because constantly parrying and that short stun duration means I'm going to ramp her up super, super quick. And then once she's ramped up, I can hammer into Namor, time a really long special 2 around his outrage ideally, so I don't have to worry about that power gain. I am going to trigger Spite, but I'm also going to be invulnerable, so I'm not too worried, and he should go down pretty quick with Brie, so that's not a big deal anyways. Next up is Stealth Suit, who can be just ramped down. Brie Larson should knock him out pretty quick. Brie Larson handles Mysterio super easily because she is poison immune, so it might be a longer fight as I dance around the special 1 and the special 2, but I won't have to worry about the poison. There's no threat. I'll be using her for Sunspot as well. Now, once I trigger the invulnerability, I don't have to worry too much about the Incinerate, and Sunspot doesn't have anything keeping him alive in this fight. So essentially, I'll just trigger the invulnerability very quick, throw my special 2, and the fight will be virtually over. Next up is Vision Arcus, who I plan on bringing Claire for, because I do feel like having a Mystic is going to be really good there, and I don't plan on changing my masteries. Next up is Silver Surfer, who I'll be bringing Claire for as well, just so I can parry spam him down and then end the fight with a special 3. Should be fairly simple. And then Mole Man, I plan on using Brie Larson as well, just because when I did this fight with Quake, it was really annoying, and I just think it's going to be easier to out-damage him instead. Next up is if your team is centered on Quake, but you don't necessarily have the same team I have. The other options you're going to need are an Incinerate immune, a non-robot poison immune, a Mystic Nullify, and +1. If you get the idea, this is essentially what I had, right? I used Captain Marvel movie as both my non-robot poison immune and my Incinerate immune. I used Clairvoyant for my Mystic, and then I technically had 2 slots, so I used Nick and Deadpool X-Force for the healing synergy. So that does change a couple things. So the first one is that you can Quake this Invisible Woman. Beware of the heal block though. That is kind of frustrating, but otherwise it's a fairly simple fight as long as you're mindful of masochism as well. Ideally you pop an attack boost so the fight is a bit quicker. You can use anyone on Namor, anyone on Stealth Suit. Mysterio, you bring that counter. Sunspot, you bring that counter. Vision and Silver Surfer, you use your Mystic Champion, whoever nullification that may be. And then Mole Man, you can Quake it, but ideally you probably use anyone or one of the other champions you brought to fill that slot. It's a pretty simple fight, so nothing too bad to worry about there. Next up, I have a team centered on Corvus. Now, if you bring Corvus, there's no guarantee the fights are in this order. A lot of these fights give really good charges, notably starting on week 3. That's why you see a lot of red here at the top, where it's like I'm highlighting the fights that aren't Corvus. But they're not necessarily in this order. But for the planning and expectation of bringing Corvus as your main dealer, I do have like to pretend they're in order just to kind of give this rough guide. So just make sure you watch out because this is based on the assumption that it's in this order. All of these fights where it says anyone, you could swap in Corvus instead if he's got the charges. The reason I don't recommend him early on is because you don't have a lot of charges. So on your team, you're going to need Corvus, you're going to need Mystic Champion, you're going to need a Mutant, specifically for Nick Fury. You're going to need a Mr. Sinister counter, which would ideally double as a Havoc counter or as a Man-Thing counter, but at least would counter Mr. Sinister. And then pending whatever you bring there, you would need a Poison Immune non-robot, Red Guardian, a Havoc counter, or slow and or damage. Just kind of depending what you have. There's just a lot of options for champions that counter Mr. Sinister, so I kind of had to leave that very 5th slot a little open-ended. So starting off, you're going to bring anyone and just kind of play around the Unstoppable and the special baiting on Thing and Diablo. They're not the worst fights, but it is going to be a little more frustrating because you're tight on roster. For Havoc, I recommend using Corvus. You're probably going to take a really good amount of feedback damage, but you're going to want to boost up as well, Cosmic Boost. If you're not Cosmic Boosting to just blast him down really, really quick, then I recommend using someone else, ideally a Havoc counter if you have the slot. But if you are reliant on Corvus, pick up a Cosmic Boost him down, and then maybe just heal up or rely on the Glaive immunity to carry you through. Mr. Sinister, you need that specific counter. Nick Fury, you want to bring your Mutant, and then you can use anyone for Bree and Human Torch, but I wouldn't recommend Corvus because you probably only have 1 charge at this point. If you do have that 1 charge though, you could use him here, especially if you're still boosted. Next up, Nihilus and Calypsidian, you can use your Mystic Champion. Cull, you could technically use anyone, but he's an easy fight, so it really doesn't matter. Ebony Maw, you can use anyone, and Invisible Woman, you can use anyone as well. I think for Ebony Maw, I guess I should make the note, anyone except for Corvus. Because the guaranteed crits will cause you to miss your attacks. Next up is Vision Arcus. You'll bring your Mystic. Man-Thing, you'll bring a Poison Immune because Corvus's damage is going to be super weak there and it'll bite you in the back. And Silver Surfer, you'll bring your Mystic. All these other fights, you're going to be ramped up with Corvus at this point. Starting with Namor and Stealth Suit, you're just going to get a bunch of charges. And all these other fights, you will absolutely obliterate. Even like the Silver Surfer and the Vision Arcus, you could potentially just blast down with Corvus. He's going to be super strong at that point. So that is an option as well. Next, let's go through Domino. So Domino, I do have it set up where you have the Red Hulk synergy because you want that Incinerate. You're going to need a non-robot Poison Immune, a Mystic, and an Incinerate Immune or Havoc counter if you're confident that your Rolk can tank the Sunspot because the Trial by Fire is going to hurt until you get that Incinerate immunity. But for Domino, you can use her for essentially the first several fights. The first time you're going to want to switch off is a Nihilus, where you'll bring a Mystic Champion. Mysterio, where you'll bring that non-robot Poison Immune. Sunspot, where you bring that Incinerate Immune. Vision Arcus, where you use your Mystic again. And Man-Thing, where you bring a non-robot Poison Immune. Now, Guillotine 2099 and Warlock, you could arguably use someone else for, but Domino should be able to handle both those fights fairly well because she does have the parry-heavy playstyle. So there's not a lot of contact hits, and it's a really good amount of damage. And overall, I think this is a really solid option as well. Ideally, you would have slot for Massacre, so you don't have to worry about the fights where there are limber. But if you don't have that extra slot, don't fret. It's not a big deal. Next up, if you're centralized on Nick Fury and Captain Marvel movie, you're going to need a Mystic, a Mutant, and a specifically Mr. Sinister counter. So Captain Marvel movie can blast through these first 3 fights fairly easily. The thing in the Diablo, you're going to be relying on playstyle. So Diablo, you might want to bring someone other than CMM, just kind of depending on who your other 3 options are on your team. I wouldn't necessarily recommend Nick because of the redoubled determination. That's also the reason why I don't necessarily recommend CMM, but the nice thing about it is once you throw out your special 2 for like insane damage, he is stunned, and honestly my Captain Marvel movie kills a lot of these people in like 2 combos and a special 2 and then another combo to the face. So even, especially if you're boosting, especially if you're popping Cosmic Boost, etc., you don't have to worry too much about the special 3 threat because you'll just kill him after the special 2. So take that with a grain of salt on how you want to approach the fight. Mr. Sinister, you have the specific counter. Nick Fury, you're going to want to bring a Mutant. Captain Marvel movie's not going to be a good option there. Brie Larson, you could use your Mystic champion here as well. Human Torch, you could bring someone else as well. The reason being that he does have redoubled determination. But as I said, as long as you're mindful not to push him to a special 3 before you throw your special 2, he just immediately gets deleted, so you don't have to worry too much about the power gain. Annihilus, you use your Mystic. Vision Arcus, you use your Mystic. And Mojo, you might use your double dip Mr. Sinister counter here. It just depends on who you're bringing. Like maybe you brought Void, or maybe you brought Captain America Infinity War. It just depends. I'm not entirely sure who you're slotting into your roster, so look out for that. And then finally, the last one I'll go over is Omega Red. Omega Red, you're going to want to bring Deadpool, X-Force, or Sabretooth for the synergy. You need to bring a Mystic, an Incinerate Immune, and ideally a Robot. So, because if you're bringing Omega Red, I'm on the assumption that you're at least running Attrition Masteries. Now, if you're not running Willpower for some reason, then you don't need the Robot. But odds are, if you're running Omega Red and that's your team centralized, you probably have Willpower and you don't want to change your Masteries because you're like me, in which case you're going to want to bring a Robot for Warlock. So the fights that you need other options for are Annihilus with your Mystic, Sunspot with your Incinerate Immune, Warlock with your Robot, Vision Arcus with your Mystic, Guillotine 2099. You can use anyone, just pretty much you don't want to use Omega Red. You can, but use someone else, it'll be easier. Silver Surfer, you could use Omega Red or your Mystic champion here, and then you're finished through. So that's just like 5 plus my team spreadsheet run-throughs of what you want to build. The kind of like general template here is essentially you have a series of damage fights where you just need damage. You don't have to worry about the nodes too much because they're something you can play around through playstyle, and just having high quantities of damage is going to blow the champion up, and that's going to make it a lot simpler. And then you have specific fights like Annihilus and Silver Surfer where you want a specific counter, or Sunspot where like if you don't bring an Incinerate Immune, you're SOL. And that's where you draw the rest of your team. So if you're looking to build a team that's not one of the ones I have here, essentially find your damage dealer, find all the fights that they can take down using this as your guide, and then go to all the fights that you need specific counters for and knock them out one by one. My general recommendation is the Mystic, the Incinerate Immune, and the non-robot Poison Immune. Those are the 3 that are the most common between all of them. That said, hopefully this helps you plan for the Omega Boss Rush. Good luck taking down fight number 31, whoever that may be, and as always, I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.